think we realised that it's inevitable that, you know, if you're a successful pop band, then you've not really taken that seriously, because, you know, pop bands in general shouldn't be taken seriously.
I mean, how serious is the whole business in the first place, you know, to be quite honest? You know, I mean, I think you've got to be, to a certain extent, quite light-hearted about it. The whole business is pretty flaky, you know. I mean, it's, you know...
It's dangerous to take yourselves too seriously.
You just end up with your head up your...
Strange love, strange eyes and strange love, strange love, I'll make your heart smile. Will you return it? I'll say it again. Pain, pain, will you return it? I'll say it again. Pain, pain, will you return it? I won't say it again.
Now, I'm not really a stickler for electronic music. While I like to think of myself as an open-minded listener who'll give just about anything a shot, I'm well aware that most of my taste is based on the foundations of my early years of listening to what many will call dad rock, and many of my favorite bands and albums reflect this. Hell, my first real experience with electronic music was dubstep. And let me say that was not a great introduction. But the subject of today's retrospective, Depeche Mode, is a big exception to that rule. They seem to be a band a lot of rock and metal fans can agree on. And sure, they use guitars a good bit and they have a rock edge on some albums, but they're still very much their own thing. There's no one else in the world of electronic music that I listen to anywhere near as much. I mean, besides them, I like some Brian Eno and Aphex Twin, but that's about it. Depeche Mode are like the god particle of their era of music to so many people. They've influenced everyone from Tegan and Sara to fucking Rammstein. With their unique mix of synth pop, rock, and goth, they made the world their oyster, and that's only scratching the surface. This is the Depeche Mode retrospective. In 1980, a group called No Romance in China was formed with Vince Clarke on guitar and vocals, and his schoolmate Andrew Fletcher on bass. They later changed their name to Composition of Sound and then Depeche Mode. And they kind of misunderstood the meaning, but hey, it sounds cool and it's a total vibe. At first, they were only interested in sounding like the bands who influenced them, like The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, and the punk bands who dominated the alternative scenes of England. But soon after the band's formation, Vince was introduced to a band called Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD as most who don't want to repeat that mouthful usually call them. Clarke was inspired to chase the electronic synth music train, which was only just starting to gain some prominence on the pop charts. And when you listen to OMD's early material, you can clearly hear the influence they left on the band's early sound. Vince and Andy traded in their stringed instruments for synths, and a man named Martin Gore was introduced into the fray mainly because he was one of very few people within Basildon who actually owned a synthesizer. And I must say, the fact that arguably the band's most important member was hired because of such simplistic reasoning is pretty funny. But they approached being a synth band as if they were a standard band, with 2 guitars, bass, and a drummer. And you can hear it in their early work. One synth was playing the role of bass, one a lead guitar, and so on and so forth. And as influenced as they were by bands like OMD, the complete changeover to synths was more about practicality than anything. I mean, synths were easy to lug around, and they weren't very good at real guitar anyway. And it was a kind of scrappy punk thing to do, you know, just to get things done, very DIY. And because of this decision, they had a unique sound and became one of the first all-synth bands to even sniff the charts. So now they had 3 guys in the synth, but they didn't want to be a bunch of weirdos crouched over their keyboards like Kraftwerk. They wanted a frontman to make them visually interesting to look at. They were introduced to a friend of a friend, Dave Gahan, and due to the fact he was a great singer and had a lot of contacts within the scene and was far better looking than the rest of them, he got the job. It was because of Dave's smooth baritone and stage presence, influenced by the Damned's Dave Vanian. He was one of the driving factors behind the band's material getting darker throughout their career. To try and get a record deal, they would just walk into record companies with a 1/4-inch tape and demand that they hear their material, which went about as well as you could imagine. Most if not all the labels never even really gave them a time of the day, except for Rough Trade. who did like it but said that it wasn't really right for them, so they put the band in contact with Daniel Miller of Mute Records, an electronic musician who owned an independent label with many electronic artists. It seemed to be a match made in heaven, if you exclude the fact that Miller was not interested in the slightest. But he later saw them support Fad Gadget, a band on Mute's roster, and he signed Depeche Mode right there and then for a single, which turned out to be a song called Dreaming of Me, a peppy and simple, to the point of insanity love song that's so cheery with ooh-la-las and a very kiddie synth tone. It was the band inarguably in their infancy, but it's really catchy and you can see the roots for the greatness to come.
Filming and screening, I picture the scene. Filming and dreaming of me.
The single did pretty well for an independent band's debut, and they received another offer from Phonogram, which were offering a boatload of money and even clothing allowances. I'm not kidding. But they stuck with Daniel because not only did they like the music on his label, but they also felt a kinship with him and a level of trust. I mean, they were still with the Mute until Spirits in 2017. What else can I say? And with their first single making a name for them, they released their first album, appropriately titled given the fact that they're an electronic band, Speak and Spell.
What do you want people to experience when they listen to your music?
Just have good fun and enjoy it with us, and I don't have to find anything from the music or the lyrics. As long as I enjoy it.
Do you think that the band will look the same in another 2 years with only synths?
If you come back in 2 years' time, then you can say, I don't think we're going to change. You never know though. You know, we might change in a week's time, but who knows?
Complicating, circulating, new life, operating, generating, new life, new life.
For a band's debut, it's easy to say, wow, they sound like a totally different band. But it couldn't be any more true here. Sure, 3/4 of the band who played on nearly every other album are here, but the most important guy during this period was Gone Daddy Gone after the tour. Vince Clarke wrote every song barring 2 on this album, and it's clear as day that this guy had nothing to do with songs like Personal Jesus or Stripped. He's a fan of fun, bouncy synth lines, hard-driving rhythms, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, but more simple lyrics about love or grand adventure like New Life. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I may have a general distrust of, happy people, but not every song needs to be an aching and willowing ballad about how your hamster died when you were 7. I also sometimes enjoy the musical equivalent of Candy. It has a place. I'm not always depressed. I just am most of the time. And sure, if your first introduction to this band was like Songs of Faith and Devotion or something, this might feel like finding out your favorite art house director used to work on Yo Gabba Gabba. And you're free to hate it if you want. But I don't think this era should be completely written off. If you wince, you can still see the building blocks of the band's sound here in a very rough form, like in Puppets or Photographic. And the album isn't always sunshine and rainbows because the second song on this album has the cheery title of Sometimes I Wish I Was Dead. But the song is nowhere near as gloomy as the title would suggest. The lyrics detail a slightly bitter look at a relationship, but the music itself is so chipper and Dave sings it with such glee that I'm inclined to believe it was some sort of a morbid joke. But if it is a joke, it's an infectiously catchy one.
Backstreet, never meet, never say goodbye. Never say goodbye. I know where you go, but I don't know why. You say that it's from above, and I say this is not love.
Even though I do have some praise for this album, and I think Vince Clarke is a talented songwriter, I can't say I love this record. For as groundbreaking as they were in many respects, the songwriting itself often feels a bit dated with lame hooks and synths that feel stiff. I wouldn't be surprised if many of these songs are written on guitar, because I can see some songs like Boys Say Go working as a Dickies-like pop-punk song. But the energy a song like this can have just isn't there when the instrumental sounds held back. What's Your Name is honestly the gayest song I've ever heard. At the very least, it's the gayest song ever written by, as far as I can tell, a straight guy. I don't get it. I've heard songs written about gay sex, written by gay men, that are way less gay and much less overt about it than this. Maybe they were trying to appeal to the disco and dance pop's gay scenes, but the gays have better taste than this. There's a reason both Fletch and Martin have called this their least favorite Depeche Mode song, and I'm inclined to agree.
Hey, you're such a pretty boy.
Sounds nice.
I question your sexuality.
2 songs were written by Martin Gore on this album, so there's moments on this album that sound familiar to what you've heard on, later records. An okay instrumental, Big Muff, and the slow dirge Tora Tora Tora. It's not quite dark, but it's very moody and has a really neat vibe. And it's total Martin Gore, complete with slightly obtuse lyrics. Martin also has the first introduction on lead vocals on this album, starting the trend of having at least one song sung by the man on every album going forward. A practice I'm a fan of. As long as other members can sing, I appreciate occasional songs sung by other members of the band other than the lead singer. It's usually a nice change of pace, and Martin's tender tenor contrasts well against Dave's booming baritone. And the song Any Second Now is a pretty decent tune for his debut. It reminds me of a very early and basic version of A Question of Lust. But like with the band itself, Gore would soon be onto much better material, to put it lightly. Though the song everyone knows off this album is Just Can't Get Enough, one of the most iconic pop songs of all time, used in commercials and high school dances the world over to this very day. It's so melodramatic, but it works so well that I can't complain. It feels incurably adolescent. And Dave sounds like he's 15 in puppy love with the girl next door. The main riff lets you know from the outset that you're in for a fun and wholesome time. There's a reason that despite everything they've made since, they still play it live. They're not like Radiohead never play Creep anymore because we've matured, man. No matter how many goths are in the crowd, you'll never fail to bust a move as soon as you hear that iconic riff.
Just like a rainbow, you know you set me free. And I just can't get enough, and I just can't get enough. You're like an angel and you give me your love, and I just can't seem to get enough.
So the band is doing incredibly well. They had some hits, the album was doing really good, appearances on Top of the Pops, a successful tour, and a bright future ahead of them. Until their songwriter quit. And for reasons not completely clear, Vince Clarke decided to leave, citing a general unhappiness with the sudden fame of the band, and the commitments that they were tied to because of it. He was not happy about spending his day doing photo shoots and interviews. This continued with his later musical projects because he made other members do that shit. Though as a parting gift, Clarke offered the band a song he wrote called Only You, but they declined. The song then went on to be a big hit for his new band, Yazoo. Fucking whoops. And when you listen to it, you can totally see why it was written for Vince's then former band. It's a really sweet love song, and I love what Alison Moyet brought to it. Her tender performance sounds really personal.
All I needed was the love you gave. All I needed for another day. And all I ever knew, only you.
In fact, for a couple of years, Yazoo were considerably more popular than Depeche Mode, and after Yazoo imploded, Clarke formed another successful pop duo called Erasure. In Vince's place, they found a young man named Alan Wilder, who responded to an advertisement in the Village Voice looking for, quote, keyboard player for established band, no time wasters. And after lying about his age, saying he was younger than 21 and wowing the band with his immeasurable talent during the audition, he got the job. But Dave, Martin, and Andy wanted to record the next album as a three-piece to prove that they weren't reliant on Vince, and they wouldn't be reliant on Alan. So for the band's next chapter, Depeche Mode would remain a broken frame.
Dave Gahan and the Tape Deck share the stage with synthesizer players Andy Fletcher, Alan Wilder, and Martin Gore. Gore is also the chief songwriter for the group. When composing, he relies on the guitar to work out the chords, but any other time, Martin prefers synthesizers.
I think I got a bit bored with the sound of the guitar. You know, the electric guitar, there's not a lot that you can do with the sound of it. You know, you can flange it or put it through an echo or something, but it's still basically the same sound. And the synth offers a variety of sounds. Now you can almost get any sound on it if you look for it.
She'll catch me if she can. Take me by the hand. I'll have to keep on running, and I just can't see the fun in my secret garden. Not being secret anymore.
A Broken Frame is an album with a general mood of depression surrounding it. Now I understand that may sound strange, but Let me explain. They were going into this album with a fairly low morale. Their most important member went Splitsville, Martin was taking over songwriting and he probably wasn't too prepared since they used some songs he had written years prior. Alan Wilder was not included in the recording despite the fact the band probably did want his contributions. And there's Martin's songwriting itself being much different to Vince's. Davis said that Martin writes beautiful music, but it's mainly his lyrics that are on the morose side. But I disagree. While Martin's music is indeed beautiful, and it can be more up-tempo, he prefers dark soundscapes, creating atmosphere, less dancey rhythms, and writing in minor keys to create moody pieces. It's more than just his lyrics being sad-sounding. Like if you take their big hit off this album, See You, even discounting the lyrics detailing a breakup, the song itself is still very melancholic. It's a vibe that they went for on many tracks in this album, and I think it pays off quite well. It feels specific to a mood that I at least find myself in quite a bit. But as much as I think he can work, as a whole I feel A Broken Frame feels a little weak compared to other records this band has done. While the instrumentals are richer than Speak and Spell, they lack a certain level of punch and they just don't hit the same way. The instrumentals also aren't as lush and interesting as they would be later on, so it hits a weird middle ground. In fact, the whole record sticks around slower, moodier BPMs. Even songs like Meaning of Love, which I do think is a decent track for the record, sounds like something akin to earlier material, but it lacks the impact and catchiness of a Vince Clarke composition, and it sounds really held back, mainly because tracks like this really aren't in Martin's wheelhouse. He's a magnificent songwriter, but he has his limits. I think when the record really shines, it's when they commit to their darker tone, like the fantastic instrumental Nothing to Fear, the nursery rhyme of My Secret Garden, and Shouldn't Have Done That, which is a superb song that has every line sung like a harmonious Gregorian chant with a fairly reserved, almost ambient composition behind the voices. But my favorite song of this album, and most people's favorite in fact, is The Sun and the Rainfall. It sounds like the calm before the storm, or the quiets following a storm. It's one of several songs of this record analogous to the band's falling out with Vince. It has the best atmosphere that can be heard from this era of the band, and while downbeat, you can almost hear the sunrise in the distance. The feeling that it's getting better. And this is only the beginning. Broken Frame is not a bad record, there's a lot of highlights, but throughout listening I can't help but feel like something's missing, like on tracks like Leave and Silence. Either something's missing from the song or this video is just too bizarre even for me. But before the recording of the next full length, they were kinda pressured to record a single, but it turned out to be good timing because Alan Wilder was really getting annoyed at the band because he wanted to be an actual member, not just a hired gun.
I'm sure I probably put some pressure on after a given length of time that, you know, look, either let me join or I'll just go somewhere else because I don't want to be a part-time session musician, really.
So recording a single was the best course of action, so they could really see if he could cut the mustard, and he could. The session for the resulting single, Get the Balance Right, was the most involved recording experience they had had up until that point, and you could tell that they put their all into it. Especially listening to the 12-inch mix, Alan was really willing to prove himself here. The song became a big hit in the underground dance clubs in the US. In fact, it was their first taste of any kind of success in the United States. Also, when it came time to record the video, the director thought that Alan was the lead singer for some reason, so he sang the majority of the lyrics and the band was too embarrassed to correct him. Which is kind of funny. Though the band themselves are not big fans of the song.
I don't know what people like about it. he never really did it for us.
But Depeche Mode were finally unified and were a complete frame. But before long, it was construction time again.
All the subject matter was, you know, sort of worldly. I think Martin was writing outside of himself, and you know, teenagers growing up, and you know, bad government and all that stuff.
It's all part of a process where we were starting to grow up and starting to challenge what we'd done previously.
You know, we were, you know, getting a bit older and more worldly. We'd even been to Asia, so we were becoming more aware of the world as a whole.
Keep telling us we're to have fun, then take all the ice cream, so we've got none. This is more than a party, more than a party.
Depeche Mode are a band with now 3 debut albums from a certain point of view. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. Speak and Spell was their first, but very different from their forthcoming records. A Broken Frame has Martin's songwriting and a darker tone, but Construction Time Again has all these things along with Alan rounding out their sound. And Alan was a classically trained musician, so he was able to push Martin's songs further than the band could previously, as well as help out on the production side of things, helping to provide that distinctive, punchy, and dense sound that they're known for. The band got into sampling and incorporating industrial elements into their sound after seeing a gig by German noise rock legends Einstürzen der Neubauten. That's as close as I'm getting, dude. A guy named Gareth Jones is brought in as the Tonmeister, which kinda just means engineer, and he would help the band with all the sampling. And for this record, they sampled anything metallic sounding that they could get their hands on, which gave way to the title of the album, Construction Time Again, a double meaning, one in the sense that musically they're at work creating new sounds, and in another sense the industrial sounds they were using were reminiscent of construction equipment at work. Pipeline is a great example of this. There's very few normal synths to be found on this track. Almost everything you hear is made up of samples of cold steel being hit with hammers or being modulated in the studio to sound slightly more musical. And Martin's vocals are recorded inside an old construction site, so all the reverb you hear was not added in post. That's just how the raw track sounded.
From the heart of our land to the mouth of the man must reach sometime. We're laying a pipeline.
And even for the normal synths, they would run them through guitar amps and record the room sound as well as the sound from the synthesizer to give it a bigger, airier sound, and more of a rock bite, which I think paid off quite well since Depeche Mode are still a band frequently name-checked by several rock and metal bands. Alan also contributed 2 songs for this record, not too dissimilar from Martin writing 2 songs for Speak and Spell. It's a shame he never went on to contribute as much songwriting-wise as Martin, because I think he showed a lot of promise in these songs. But Alan has said that he doesn't really like writing songs all that much, and he really dislikes writing lyrics. He did it on this album more out of obligation. He even modeled his songwriting after Martin and wrote about politics like Martin was at the time. We'll come back to this later. The Landscape is Changing is about environmental desolation. As in the 80s, we were just beginning to feel the effects of the industrialization of the world and the impact it was having on our environment. Good thing we don't have to worry about that anymore, huh? And 2 Minute Warning is about nuclear war. The title and hook comes from the Doomsday Clock, a symbol that is supposed to represent the likelihood of a man-made global catastrophe. So when Dave sings the chorus, it's less of a hook and more of a warning. Subject matter wise, it's really heavy. Heavier than anything Martin was writing at this time, funnily enough.
The sun, the solitude, the cemetery. So welcome to your life. 2 minute warning, 2 minutes later when time has come, my days are numbered.
As mentioned before, the band were dipping their foot into politics as a result of them becoming more cultured and worldly, having toured the globe. A lot of the political subject matter is slightly adolescent and somewhat vague at times, but since Britain was in the midst of Thatcher, it doesn't take a whole lot of guesswork to figure out who they're talking about in songs like More Than a Party, with its slamming MIDI bass and Dave's accusatory performance. It's a vicious attack on the Tories, and I'm here for it.
Shut up, you fascist Tories! No one tells me what time to go to bed!
And despite how young Martin and Alan were at the time, their lyrics are less adolescent than they likely should be. They're sharply written, and it doesn't feel like the guy you used to know who had his mind blown after seeing V for Vendetta when he was 15. They even very intentionally invoke socialist and Soviet imagery when designing the album arts and the covers for the singles. The big hit off this album is no exception when it comes to politics. Everything Counts is about corruption and corporate greed within Britain, and it's not exactly discreet at all. It's an angry song written from the point of view of the working class that was being decimated at the time. It is still being sliced and diced to this very day. It's also magnificently produced, there's so much going on, and you can find something different every single time you listen to it. Very few pop songs had this layered of a production, at least at the time, and you just can't beat Dave and Martin and even Alan's vocals working together in the chorus. It's something else. I would call Construction Time Again the true debut from Depeche Mode.
What happened before then? It was just tuning up before then.
I think this is the first album you can point to and really see the links to what they became later. There were hints of it earlier, but it was in a very adolescent form and kind of had to crane your neck to hear it. But it was here where they got balls deep in creating huge soundscapes and were one of, if not the first pop band to use sampling and industrial elements to the extent that they did. But they're only just beginning, and they were soon to experience some great reward.
What do you think about what Jimmy Page is saying there about modern musicians, as if there was something actually wrong about using computers?
Well, I don't know, Technology was moving really fast, and we used it. The idea of creating a new sound that you hadn't heard before was much more interesting to us.
We weren't trying to be trendy or clever. We were just literally picking things up that were around us and saying, let's sample that.
For some great reward, the band found themselves wanting to go further and totally envelop themselves into their sound, and in order to do this, they recorded this album in Berlin, Germany. And due to how gloomy it was during this period, it results in this album continuing the trend of each Depeche Mode album getting darker and darker. The production itself was also an improvement. It's extremely intense and impactful. Combine that with the returning and now more omnipresent industrial elements, and you get an album that literally sounds like heavy metal. They literally shook the foundations of the studio in order to get the album sounding the way it did.
The acoustics of People Are People and the sound of the beats and the big fills and things is all the sound of the rooms with the beats getting thrown around Hansa Studio, 3 floors down for the bass drum. Snare drum 1 floor over, toms in another room over there kind of thing. The whole building was shaking.
Nothing is lost in translation. You can still hear everything. And I think that's because nearly every effect you hear is analog and physically on the recording, like the reverb and delay. And with digital recording nowadays, you often lose something when you add a lot of stuff to one track. Not to bash modern recording, because you can still do a lot of cool stuff with modern programs, but the limitations of older technology was more beneficial than some may think. A great example of how good this album's production is its hit single, People Are People, a pretty blatant song with its message to reject bigotry. It is the exact opposite of subtle, and it's part of the reason why they don't play it live anymore. Martin has gone on record saying it's one of his least favorite Depeche Mode songs, but it's so catchy and hits you like a cannon. And hey, being overt about racism being bad, I mean, that's all good in my book. Martin's songs in this album are on the softer side. It Doesn't Matter is about still loving someone despite them moving on, and the blunt jealousy is heartbreaking. And Somebody is the more standard love song. The simplicity of the track brings your attention to the sheer honesty in the lyrics. And even then, there's a lot of subtlety going on in the background, giving it a really atmospheric vibe with only really a piano and a reverb. It feels like it's helping tell its story along with lyrics, because it sounds like people having drinks, laughing, and having a good time. Speaking of atmosphere, that was a big focus on this album. Alan really stepped up to the plate and was with Gareth Jones and Daniel Miller in the studio until the early hours of the morning, until the other guys fucked off to the club hours prior. And again, near the end of the sessions, the other guys once again left, this time to go on holiday, and left Daniel, Gareth, and Alan to finish the record.
And it was like, oh well, Dan, we've got to go on holiday. Good luck with finishing the album. I'm sure it'll be great. Anyway, see you in a couple of weeks. Bye. And so the others went off on holiday and we finished the record.
Now the funny thing that's happened is that Martin's, according to their telex, which they sent us, Martin's lost his baggage, which went to first New York and then Johannesburg, so that's his karma for pissing off during the mixing.
But this isn't a bad thing, at least not for the fans. I'm sure they were annoyed quite a bit the guy's ditching, but we got great atmospheric vibes in most songs, including Stories of Old. It's a sort of bitter love song. It's about a partner trying to change you to fit them when that's not really how relationships work. In fact, in my experience, I've seen more relationships last with totally contrasting figures, compared to people who are basically dating their clones. Besides, you should be with someone who loves you for you. And if you need to change everything about yourself, then they're simply not worth it, dude. This album doesn't focus on politics anywhere near as much as they did on Construction Time Again, which is probably for the best because it kinda got a little old after a while. Some Great Reward focuses on relationships and to a lesser extent philosophy. One sort of political song is Master and Servants, but it's subtextual. It's mainly about exactly what you think it's about because of that fucking title. There's a lot of parallels with the lyrics about BDSM also fitting well with capitalism. But my favorite song is Blasphemous Rumors, a song detailing how God can fail and let you down. It's not necessarily anti-God, but it does raise an important question. If God does exist, then why does he let such awful things happen every day? If he can do even half the shit in the Bible, then how come there are children dying of starvation, cancer, and general illness? How come an estimated 2 billion people globally don't have clean water to drink? Whether you believe in God or not, you gotta admit it's a fair point to discuss. The song itself is fairly small scale, telling the story of a teenage girl who tries to kill herself, thankfully doesn't succeed, becomes a Christian, turns her life around, only to be fatally hit by a car 2 years later. And I hate to admit, but it's a perfect story to really hammer in the points of the chorus. One of my all-time favorites in all of 80s pop.
I don't want to start any blasphemous rumors, but I think that God's got a sixth sense of humor, and when I die, I expect to find him laughing.
Some Great Reward really showed people that Depeche Mode weren't just another teeny bopper synth pop sensation. They were a band with real ambitions to take their music to a never-ending finish line, despite looking like a group made up of twinks and femboys. They even had their first real success in America, a really big tour of the States, and People Are People finding its way to the top 20. The band found themselves between a lull of their next album and the ending of the tour, and decided to release a compilation of all their singles up to that point, as well as 2 new songs, so they had some stuff to market it with. It's called A Heart and Shake the Disease. The former is kind of underwhelming and feels sort of regressive. It's not bad, but it lacks a real hook that sticks with you. The B-side was Fly on the Windscreen, which is a much better song that would be on the next record. Alan fought for it to be on the A-side, but the first line of the song is death, so he was unfortunately outvoted. But the other single, Shake the Disease, is one of the band's all-time best. It's so lush, there's hooks around every corner, David Martin's voices work better than ever before and maybe since. Wikipedia calls it dark wave, and while it's maybe a bit poppy to truly be qualified as such, it does kind of fit. There's a somewhat perverse nature to it, something ugly hiding underneath the surface of what is essentially a love song. Alan's is better than I can, so I'll just quote him here. There's a certain edge to what we do that can make people think twice about things. If we've got a choice between calling a song Understand Me or Shake the Disease, we'll call it Shake the Disease. There's a lot of perversity and innuendo in our lyrics, but nothing direct. Goddamn, these guys are geniuses.
Here is a plea, my heart to you. Nobody knows me as well as you do. You know how hard it is for me to shake the disease that takes hold of my tongue in situations like these.
In fact, I feel the song is a real turning point for the band. All it took was a Black Celebration to prove it.
The name of the new album is Black Celebration. What a wild title. It's like a contradiction in terms.
We're a wild
almost.
band.
Yeah. Well, it's actually, a lot of people sort of read a lot of odd things into it. You know, a lot of people, the black celebration.
They thought it was Black Mass.
Black Mass and stuff like that. But it's not. It's actually about really celebrating at the end of the day your sorrows and stuff, if you like. You know, the general day of work, and then everyone seems to go out at night, drink, get drunk, and really they're just celebrating something maybe they didn't really enjoy doing, or you know, or maybe they had a bad day, but they still go out and get drunk. You know, and that's what a black celebration is. You know.
Getting all I couldn't do today. Black celebration. Black celebration.
Black Celebration is the end result of everything the band had been working up towards. This was going to set a new standard, and that's how it was approached even before they went into the studio. So they hunkered down for months in Berlin for an average of 14 hours a day, laser focused on producing their best record yet. The whole album has a rich sound that envelops the listener. Not quite as dense as some of the band's prior albums, but it's for a purpose. There's a big focus on atmosphere and using reverb to fill in the sound, and not as much random metallic sounds that they found at local construction sites. So making the mixes a bit more bare was a great decision because it would have sounded like a mess otherwise. The record is also considerably darker in both subject matter and overall sound. Part of that is due to the slight bit of tension between everyone in the studio being in each other's faces for 14 hours a day, and Martin's demos he brought in. Daniel Miller said at the time, "The songs aren't good enough and will never get played on the radio." And you can see where he's coming from. We are a far cry from Just Can't Get Enough, or even Everything Counts. The lead single Stripped is a beautiful and almost ugly song of lust, but also love. It hangs in the balance a little bit, but that's what makes it intriguing. The band say it isn't about sex or anything, but wanting to see the pure human emotions of people without, you know, everything we cover ourselves with, metaphysically. Listening to this, you can see why it inspired people like Trent Reznor, and it's one of David Lynch's favorite songs of all time. No shit. The title track and Fly on the Windscreen let you know from the very beginning of what kind of record this will be. Very macabre stuff, but like with Stripped, there's a beauty in even the darkest tracks. Martin's song surprisingly on the lighter side, somewhat. Truth be told, that's not exactly saying much, but if a song contains Martin's tenor, I guess it'll never match the grave nature of Dave's voice. And with Martin's 4 songs on this album, that's not a weakness. He brings a tenderness to songs that Dave just can't. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. World Full of Nothing is a song about not loving someone but still having a meaningful relationship, even if it's just sex. It Doesn't Matter 2 has this insanely creepy choir, sometimes starts somewhat sinister but becomes a sister song to Somebody from the previous record with just Martin and who I assume is Alan playing piano with some tasty flourishes of reverbed vocals to really push it over the top. And Question of Lust is about Martin being on the road and his girlfriend's jealousy and insecurity of him maybe cheating on her. But this song is him reassuring her that he won't. It's really wholesome as he lets her know how much he loves her and that he'd rather be home with her if he could help it. But being in one of the biggest bands on the planet, it makes it a bit difficult.
It's a question of lust. It's a question of trust. It's a question of not letting what we've built up crumble to dust. It is all of these things and more that keep us together.
A Question of Time has this urgency that pushes the track forward, and you can feel your own heartbeat racing as the song goes on, despite some slightly sussy lyrics that look really bad out of context. Also, am I the only person who thinks it's weird that 2 songs off this record are called A Question of Blank? Here Is the House is a really sweet song about complex human relationships you have even with people you love. Dressed in Black is a song I feel is about BDSM like Master and Servants, but more subtextually, with overarching themes of sin and lust. And the last song on this album is a political one. New Dress is about how media and most people will focus on benign subjects that get quick attention in the headlines, but aren't important in the grand scheme of things. Dave matter-of-factly sings about familicide, terrorism, famine, and global catastrophes that then distort his voice and menacingly sing of Princess Di's new dress, in a kind of accusatory inflection in his voice. But there's a more positive outlook during the chorus, which makes it seem that not all is lost, even though the problem the song talks about is infinitely worse now, and Princess Di ended up being literally killed by the media, so I guess things never change. There's also a really great B-side from around this time called But Not Tonight. And for being a B-side, it's one of their finest tracks. It was the B-side to Stripped, but in the States it was released as the A-side because the song was included on the soundtrack of a forgotten flick called Modern Girls. There was some frustration from the band because it was also included on the original American pressings of the record, and the band just didn't think the song was up to snuff, but I disagree. It doesn't fit the album, but it's such a nice and cozy song about finding yourself, and the instrumental reflects this with its sweet melodies and some harsher elements here or there. It's a magical track that just makes you feel happy in a way not many other Depeche Mode songs do.
Reminding me of so many other nights when my eyes have been so red, I've been mistaken for dead, but not tonight.
At the time, this album received mixed reviews and didn't sell as well as records that came before and since, but showed them once again raising the bar. And despite how good this album was, the band wanted something new, so the next album would have no involvement from Daniel Miller or Gareth Jones. And keep in mind, it was Gareth that got them into sampling and experimenting with new sounds, and Daniel has been there since Dreaming of Me, but the band had ambitions to create music for the masses.
I think we always thought we were pretty comedic with our titles and going against against the grain.
It was Martin's idea to call the album Music for the Masses, and only really he knows what he was thinking.
We also thought it was ironic because, we didn't really feel that we ever fitted in with the mainstream. So Music for the Masses was, for us, had a tint of irony to it, which was often missed by other people.
The title of this record, Music for the Masses, was supposed to be ironic, as the music was still dark and there were songs that are very uncommercial, but this album contains a polish which is not found on any of the previous albums in sound or songwriting. They completely stopped with the industrial elements on this album, mainly because after a while, you run out of sounds that sound even somewhat unique. The well was already running dry on Black Celebration, so it makes sense that they would just leave it be. And they brought in Dave Bascombe to co-produce, who previously was the engineer on the Tears for Fears masterpiece, Songs from the Big Chair. And I believe Bascombe brought a kind of sophistication to the production. It wasn't quite as in-your-face as the stuff with Daniel Miller and especially Gareth Jones. Those guys had previously played with bands with a much edgier sound and was more left of the dial, so they brought a sense of impact to the previous albums. But Dave Bascombe's experience was with dance pop records, so he was able to give the band a sound that was just as, if not more so, substantial, but gave the songs a bit more room to breathe. Sacred is a great example. Lyrically, it's usual Depeche Mode fare, making connections between religion and sex in a blasphemous way that'll upset your grandmother. There's still a lot of sampling like previous albums, but there's more vocal layering and a richer, more organic soundscape. Their bass you're using straight up sounds like a real bass. It's really cool. The second side of this record is where the darkness and weirdness really comes into play. I Want You Now is a sultry and lustful song, but nearly all the instrumental is made up of heavy breathing and moaning with a kind of off-putting atmosphere. To Heaven to Hold is maybe the heaviest song they've done up to this point, with its droning synth backing Dave's dark presence and vocals. And there's Pimpf, which takes its title from a Hitler Youth magazine, which is nice, but it fits with the distressing nature of the song. It was heavily influenced by legendary composer Philip Glass, and it's a neo-classical piece with a foreboding chanting all throughout. You feel like something really bad is about to happen. The main piano riff swirls all throughout the song, and it's fucking frightening with everything that gets added to it. It has an atmosphere like nothing else. Take a shot every single time I mention atmosphere in this video, I swear to God you'll fucking die. The singles on this album are all magnificent. Never Let Me Down has a swinging rock rhythm that's infectious, and it's a great example of how this band, mainly Alan Wilder, could take something pretty simple and make something grandiose and elegant with its samples of church choirs and orchestration. Hell, it even gained a Kate Bush-like level of resurgence last year when it was used for the first episode of The Last of Us. Strangelove has 2 different mixes that people know. The original single the band felt was too cluttered and had too much going on for the album, so they got Daniel Miller back and he remixed the song to strip it down a bit and to help it fit on the album better. And while I like the single version better, I do agree that remixing it for the album was probably the right call. But there's a reason why I used the single version as the intro. Just saying. It's a song undeniably about sex, though it's not really lustful, but it explores the complexity of sex and the relationships around them. Behind the Wheel is my favorite of the singles. It repeats its main 4 chords over and over again, but it never gets tiring. Alan likened it to an optical illusion of a staircase that goes nowhere despite how much you traverse it. The momentum of the song and its conclusion reflects that because it gets more and more tense as it goes on. It kind of curls up your spine in a weird way that I love, especially when those creepy MIDI vocals come in. It's something else entirely. Overall, Music for the Masses may not have actually been Music for the Masses, but it came close. It was the most commercially successful tour yet, and it was the start of them getting big in the Americas with a really successful tour that ended in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, which can hold how many people? The tour itself was chronicled in the documentary 101, including many incredibly shot clips of the Rose Bowl show, as well as the band on tour and some fans who won a contest to appear in the documentary. And while I enjoy it overall, most of the fans range from boring to downright annoying.
Jay, you want to stand around? Yo, dog.
This is Albuquerque's known for heavy metal.
Oh, what do they know? They probably only hang out at heavy metal clubs. They're driving a Chevrolet, what do they know?
I understand it was the point to showcase the fans of the band. I just wish they chose some other group of kids, to be honest. Regardless, this album showed the band at heights never before thought possible. But can they top it? Or will their next album just end up violating the masses?
When I look back on our career, I think it's more by luck than anything that we're still around. I had a catching up session the other day. I was just playing a few of our old CDs and things I haven't listened to for years. I just really think it's more by luck than anything that we're still around. We were totally naive. We didn't have a clue what we were doing.
Mark actually turned around. He was listening over there listening in the studio when we were working, and he just turned around and said, "We're just so weird."
I think we're lucky that most of the fans agree with us that that we've improved over the years. I think a lot of fans, if they're a fan of a band, a lot of the time always think the early stuff's better, and then it's a downhill trend from there. I think a lot of our fans agree with us that we've actually improved.
We're constantly sort of trying to better what we do, and I still don't believe that we've sort of reached a peak.
Let me show you the world with my eyes. That's all there is. Nothing more than you can feel now. That's all there is.
In just about every band's career, this is an album where everything comes together. The perfect storm of creativity, mainstream success, and a desire to be bold. With the growing boredom of their method for making albums, the band decided on a total reworking of their creative process. Their new producer, Flood, was a big reason for this. He was the first person to really challenge their preconceived notions of how to make records. Previously, Martin's demos would be damn close to what the finished product would be, and they spent more time in pre-production than anything just gathering samples. So for this album, they got Martin to make much more simplistic demos, so then in production, Flood and Al could really really build upon what Martin had written much more effectively. And they started using guitars and much less sampling because Flood told them, if you want to use guitars, then use guitars. It's a fairly simplistic premise, but it was something that they needed to be told because they held a certain level of pride over how many different sounds you could get by sampling. But after so many albums, you run out of unique ideas. Sweet as Perfection is a great example of Flood's ethos for where he wanted to take the band. It's a song which, on its basis level, could have been on Music for the Masses, but with Flood's technical know-how and Alan's penchant for atmosphere and audio texturing, it was taken to a whole new level. And there's only like one or very few samples to be found on this entire song. It's amazing how they're able to make something this dense without relying on them like they did previously. And of course, Martin always kills it.
The sweetest perfection to call my own. The slightest correction couldn't find me home. The sweetest infections
There were several examples of Alan and Flood really shaping this album and making it into what it is. With all due respect to Martin, they're his songs and they're fantastic. Dave's voice really acts as an exclamation point for these songs, and they wouldn't be the same song by anybody else, and Fletch could sure play a mean game of chess, but Flood and Alan are definitely the MVPs if you ask me. Early in the production, the first song, World in My Eyes, the band were just not feeling, so they scrapped all their work on the song and started again from scratch. Just Alan and Flood jamming with it for like half a day, and by the end they had the song that we all know and love. And that's how they attacked the rest of the album. They would kick out the rest of the guys for a little while, and by the time they came back, they would listen to what Flood and Alan had come up with and give their thoughts. Though this wasn't great for everyone. Martin already had to relinquish some control, giving over incurably bare demos of his songs, not being able to work on them much more besides, lyrics, basic chords, and vocal melodies. So when Alan had the idea to turn one of Martin's slow ballads, Enjoy the Silence, into a more up-tempo dance number, Martin pushed back against this because he thought that turning it into a dance rock song kind of betrayed the lyrics. Enjoy the Silence, it's right there in the title. But thankfully he changed his tune and gave the track an achingly beautiful guitar riff that's so simple but so perfect. This song is, for lack of no better word, simply powerful. The lyrics detail a beauty of the absence of words. I've been in situations where I embrace somebody and all the communication we need is given through the physical touch. It's an achingly beautiful sentiment for a song and it never fails to strike a nerve with me. The song deserves all the accolades it has received. It is just... wow. Personal Jesus is the best guitar work in any Depeche Mode song, which I know is not the highest compliment I could give. They are a synth band. But to keep in mind, we just discussed Enjoy the Silence. There are so many hooks to it, that main riff, the refrains of each Reach Out and Touch Faith, Dave's country-inspired drawl on the verse, and that slide guitar part that'll send a shiver up your spine. There's something so eerie and irresistible about it. Halo is such a lush song with fake strings that sound heavenly, but it's about outright debauchery and your internal feelings of your own immorality, and how you'll justify it in your head, and how you almost welcome judgment for your actions. Policy of Truth has this kind of funky thing going on with a rock swing and rhythm to it, driving the song, as well as this disgusting sounding, in the best possible way mind you, main riff that comes back a couple of times. The song explores philosophy of always telling the truth, like we've been told to since we were kids. Honesty is the best policy. But what about when telling the truth is just not the right way to approach a situation? Sometimes the truth will just make matters worse for everyone. Sure, you're being honest, but at what point does telling the truth turn from a virtue to a vain flaw of character?
It's too late to change events. It's time to face the consequence for delivering the proof in the policy of truth.
Blue Dress has this lovely sounding riff throughout the song that's really high pitched, and in the treble it makes this weird effect with the reverb. Martin described it as a sort of pervy song about a man watching his partner respectfully lusting at the prospect of putting on a beautiful blue dress, which is odd, but it works. Clean ends the record, and it's a grimy dirge about spirituality and being at peace with who you are. There's some religious imagery within it, but I think it's more about a base spirituality more than any one specific religion. I think Martin probably put that imagery within the song because it's language that a born-again Christian would use, but it can apply to several things. There's Waiting for the Nights. Alan said that he and Flood were influenced by Tangerine Dream for the song, and you can hear it. The song has a synth loop all throughout the entire thing, and it just bubbles under the surface like running water. There's sub-bass to it, and it's so smooth to the ear and grips you. Not to mention the rest of the song's atmosphere and the tranquil nature of the music and the lyrics, you feel like you're at peace. This song is part of the reason why Violator really requires a decent sound system or set of headphones to really appreciate it. If you listen to this through your MacBook Air speakers, there's a lot that will just get lost in translation. Seriously, do yourself a favor and invest your money into some decent sounding headphones. And you don't need to spend that much, and listen to this record and let it envelop you. It's an experience that I recommend to everybody.
Been waiting for the night to fall. I knew that it would save us all. Now everything's dark, keeps us from the stark reality.
And that was Violator, an absolute masterclass in pop, rock, electronic, you name it, sister. It's a masterpiece in every sense of the word. Despite the ironic heavy metal title, it does kind of violate you because once you listen to it, there's no way you can't come back for more. And this was without question their commercial peak. And they not only finally broke really big in America, but everywhere. They were a global force, and it's still my favorite album they ever put out. But it begged the question, how could they follow it? I'm out of cheesy dad puns, I'm sorry, just bring on Songs of Faith and Devotion.
The four of you do work together, and it is noteworthy that after all this time, there hasn't been somebody saying, I'm going off and doing my own thing, or three of them saying, you're not carrying your own weight, leave. This happens with so many groups. Do you think it's because you were fortunate enough to find your own tasks, or is it just some sort of special chemistry?
It was obvious really that we were suffering somehow and that we weren't finding it easy to A, sort of come back together as a unit having had a bit of a break, and B, kind of live up to perhaps the success of Violator.
This is the morning of
How do you follow up an album like Violator? The band asked themselves this, and they had several answers to this question. And it's a shame that each and every one was the wrong one. Now, I'm not saying Songs of Faith and Devotion is bad. It's not even close. You can easily make the argument that this is their best work. In fact, sometimes I think I like this album even more than Violator. But the toll of this record and this general era of Depeche Mode took on this band was catastrophic. Honestly, I'm surprised they only lost one member. We're lucky nobody died, and I'm not even exaggerating. Just to start, their morale was at an all-time low, there was creative differences aplenty, and their first attempt at recording was pretty much just botched because they tried to record it in a house that the band would live in at the same time, like U2 did with Octoon Baby, which Flood also engineered. And since that worked so well for U2, he thought it would be a great idea for Depeche Mode, and he unfortunately was very wrong. The group morale, which was already on very shaky grounds, to put it very mildly, was made even worse because the living situation produced a toxic and claustrophobic environment. Thankfully, they gave up and went to an actual studio eventually to finish the record proper, but it was still a painful experience for all involved. But thanks to the resolve of the band, especially Alan, they crafted a dark and twisted masterpiece. Walking in My Footsteps is a great example of what this album gets right. It's somber, bitter, but profound lyrically and musically. The way they got those sounds to the synths and riffs still spins my head all these years later. And I think it might be a song directed at the other members from Martin's point of view, considering how much of a mess the band was at the time, even though Martin likely wrote it before they even approached the studio, but it fits regardless of that context. And it's a song both Alan and Martin have both called one of, if not the best song the band ever did. I mean, it's pretty hard to one-up that.
Try walking in my shoes, you stumble in my footsteps. Keep the same appointments I kept. If you try walking in my shoes.
After the Violator tour, the band went their separate ways for a little while, and when they returned, it was quite evident that not everyone was on the same page. They all agreed that Violator Part 2 was out of the question, but they didn't agree much past that. Dave Ruan was living in LA and became infatuated with the alt-rock bands of the time like Soundgarden and Jane's Addiction, and he wanted to turn the band to a full-blown rock band, as you can tell by his getup around this time, which I can best describe as Wendigoon if he was addicted to heroin. But I think they conceded somewhat, since this was the first Depeche Mode album to use live drums on some tracks, performed by Alan, who just decided to learn the drums. What a legend. And even for the tracks with drum machines, they were programmed in a way to sound more organic, and the sounds were sampled from kits they had in the studio. Martin and Alan would spend a lot of time jamming for song ideas, which they had never done previously in the studio for anything more than a bit of fun while taking a break. So a lot of the songs have a more rock feel and swing to them. The obvious example being I Feel You, which is only a few esoteric lyrics away from being a Doors song with an electronic edge, and there's Rush with its heavy synth riff and general upbeat rock tempo. But despite the heavier tracks, Dave says he was fairly detached throughout the recording, and with this being at the height of his heroin addiction, you can understand why. The one time Dave says that he was really involved was the gospel track Condemnation. It was a song that Martin was originally going to sing, and I could see him doing it and doing it well, but Dave really loved the song and championed himself for it, and he laid down what he has called his all-time best vocal performance, and fuck, I can't disagree. He gave it his all, despite all the issues he was going through at this time, and that's really commendable.
As immaturity, well, it's no surprise if the kindness you substitute blindness. Please open your eyes.
Probably my favorite song with this record is In Your Room. It's a dance rock song with an intense and foreboding atmosphere, with lyrics detailing lust, intimacy, and belonging. It's a haunting song that'll linger with you for more reasons than just its infectious hook. The video is also maybe their best too. There's a ton of callbacks to previous videos they made, and a large chunk of it looks like it's filmed in the Twin Peaks Black Lodge. Anton Corbijn, the man behind most of their videos since A Question of Time in 1986, he said he included all these callbacks in a sort of retrospective way because he could tell how bad a shape they were in at the time, especially with Dave's addiction. He didn't think he would ever have another opportunity to direct another video for them, and if that doesn't give any more meaning to these words, then I don't know what will.
Hanging on your words, living on your breath, feeling with your skin. Will I always be here? Hanging on your words, living on your breath, feeling with your skin. Will I always be?
A big issue during this time, or one of the big issues I should say, was the fact that they decided to pretty much forego pre-production, and when you're an electronic band, that's a problem. During the recording, everyone was agitated and detached all the time, as compared to the Violator sessions where the band was a unit with a united vision. Flood said that even by the end when they were mixing the song Judas, that Alan and Martin got into a full-blown argument over the mix of the song. It was that bad even after they moved into an actual studio from the house they were living in. Like I said, it's a miracle they lost as little as they did. There's a good chance Violator would have been their swan song given how bad the recording went. And unfortunately, we did end up losing arguably the band's most important member, but I guess someone had to go down with the ship. There's even a song on this album with a lot of lyrics relating to sacrifice and martyrdom. Higher Love. Now, it's obviously not about Alan leaving, but again, I think it fits with the holy imagery throughout the song. And of course, the song has all the hallmarks of Alan-era Depeche Mode, with the atmosphere that no one else but him can create. We miss you, buddy. And despite all the troubles the band dealt with, this was still one of their biggest successes ever. It didn't sell as well as Violator, but it went to #1 in 17 countries. The reviews were amazing, and the Devotional Tour is still today the biggest tour they ever did, in terms of attendance and just raw spectacle. Anton Corbijn handled the stage design, and it's simply put, glorious. Seriously, just watch a Devotional live show. The whole thing is on YouTube, and it's required viewing for any fans of this band. But since the show was as big as it was, they had to tour longer so they could actually turn a profit. And it took its toll. Dave's addiction was even worse on the road. Martin had several drug-induced seizures that landed him in hospital, and Fletch was suffering with clinical depression in such a bad way that he had to sit out the last leg of the tour so he could recover. And their tour manager, Daryl Beaumont, I think, Baymount, Daryl had to take his place.
I went out to dinner and then I come back and I said, I'm just checking my messages, and I got a message from Dave saying, we've had the meeting, Fletcher's going to go home, you're joining. So I was never actually asked, I was told.
And as I've already said, it was all just too much, and Alan Wilder decided he had enough, and he decided to leave due to the absolute turmoil the band and he was in. Seriously, watch the documentary about this time. Everyone was miserable, and you can't help but feel bad for Alan when he talks about the lack of appreciation he got for the band, despite his undeniable importance. I've heard rumors about pay disputes, which I wouldn't be surprised about. Martin was the songwriter and probably earned more than the rest of them combined, but it was more than just Martin that made those songs great. So I couldn't really blame Alan for wanting a bigger slice of the pie. But from what I can tell, this is pure speculation, so take this with a grain of salt.
I think something broke in me during the making of that. And again, I say it's perverse because I feel it actually sort of moves me more than anything else we've done. And yet my memories of it are very dark. And I remember thinking during, I think it was the second 5-week period that we spent in Madrid, I said to myself, don't forget this moment because this is how bad it gets. And I had it in my mind that, we must never allow this situation to occur again. And if I still feel this way, further down the line, then I should perhaps just say, well, that's it,
Alan went on to devote himself fully to what used to be his side project, Recoil. It was an outlet for him to explore more experimental sounds, very John Cage inspired, as opposed to the pop he was doing with Depeche Mode. And after he left the band, Recoil went full steam ahead with albums that ran the gambit from techno, trip-hop, avant-garde, and breakbeat. Seriously, if you want some creative electronic music, Recoil is a pretty good bet. Hell, he worked with members of Curve, Diamanda Galas, and Trent Reznor was a fan, so that's gotta mean something. But as sad as Alan leaving was, the band weren't over just yet. Let's see how Depeche Mode can still go on without such a vital member. Bring on Ultra.
I had the dark side of myself, what was tempting fate. I was trying to choose my own destiny. I was trying to pick the time when it was time to leave. But there was something there for me, God or whatever, that wasn't supposed to happen, I was creating something that I wasn't. I got carried away with the whole idea of being this rock star.
You've just finished your new album. What was it like recording it?
Interesting.
Now, Ultra is a tough album to talk about for me. It's undeniably good. Great even. But there's just an elephant in the room that's missing. Every album since Construction Time Again, the band were constantly upping their game and pushing their sound. Whether you like these records or not, you can't deny that they were anything but stagnant. But Ultra feels like the first time I've ever heard this band kind of spinning their wheels and losing their edge. Obviously, Alan being gone is a problem, as I've already mentioned. He was a huge key to Depeche Mode's success. The guy spent 6 months learning to play drums just for the devotional tour and album. And he was always incredibly involved with the production. And this is the first Depeche Mode album ever to not have the band themselves credited as co-producers, which makes you think that Alan must have been the only reason the band had co-production credits to begin with, because the rest of the band were about as involved as they were on previous records. Tim Simonon, better known by his musical alias Bomb the Bass, took over production, and he's undeniably talented, don't get me wrong, but picking an up-and-comer who was a huge fan of the band might have been a mistake, because a fresh-faced fan won't push them or tell them no like Flood or Daniel Miller would, so left with a record that often feels too safe. And the band themselves, or what remained of them, were also in rough shape. Martin was hitting the bottle a lot, and Dave's addictions were even worse, and he was beginning to lose his voice after a while. The vocals for Sister of Night had to be recorded over the course of a week and stitched together, but I'll be damned if it isn't one of Dave's best. There's a sadness in the vocal that goes further than the lyrics, and it's almost beautiful because this was a man at the end of his rope, but he could still kind of deliver.
Oh sister, come for me.
Also, during the Ultra sessions, Dave fucking OD'd and died for 2 minutes before he was revived by paramedics. So yeah, that put a bit of a damper on things. But thankfully, it was just the thing Dave needed to seek help and get clean. It was a long and winding road, but he got himself there in the end. His voice took a bit of a hit, at least around this time. It wasn't as strong, and it rasped a lot, which actually sounded really cool. But that might just be because of him aging. And hell, we're lucky he's even alive to begin with. One of the songs on here, Home, I and many others to believe is partially about Dave coming back to land of the living, though Martin says it's just about him overcoming his alcohol abuse and the dark period of his life. It's such a beautiful song, maybe Martin's all-time best vocal performance. The guitar solo is so simple but so well executed for a band who doesn't really do guitar solos. The Baroque style strings are simply put gorgeous.
And I thank you for bringing me here, for showing me home, for singing these tears. Finally I found that I belong.
A lot of this album production-wise just sounds kind of lacking compared to previous records. It's nowhere near as dense, there's not as much atmosphere, nearly every song goes for a slower tempo, and when the production is already kind of held back, I can't help but feel myself getting bored. Sure, Barrel of a Gun is classic Depeche mode and is more up-tempo, heavy track, but it's the opener and you don't see anything else even remotely like it again. The closest we get is Useless, and again, it's a fantastic song, but it doesn't have the energy to carry that much momentum. Also, I've seen some people say that this song is about Alan, and I must say if that's true, that is fucking rich and kind of a dick move. This album also goes on for too long. It did not need to be an hour. Leave me wanting more, don't tire me out. At the very least, cut the boring ass instrumentals. But at least it ends with the great song, Insight. Given the fact that this album almost didn't get finished, and if it did get finished, it would have been their final record, I think this song could have been very poignant as a final song for them. It feels like a bit of a callback sonically to Songs of Faith and Devotion, and Dave's refrain of "the fire still burns" and Martin's backing vocals and the increasing tension and percussion before fading out is mesmerizing.
And the spirit of love is rising within me, talking to you now, telling you clearly the fire still burns. I'm talking to you now.
Overall, Ultra is a good record, and I can see why many love it. The dark vibe, somewhat minimal instrumentation, and the trip-hop influence makes Ultra one hell of a mood if you're into this sort of thing. But for me, the less dense production, and especially the lack of atmosphere, makes for an album doomed to live in the shadows of what came previous. And if you listen to Recoil, you can hear exactly where that atmosphere went. The band decided to forego touring for this album because they were still in a state of repair, and considering the last tour almost destroyed them, I would say that was a good choice. Also, from this point onwards, they decided to use live drums for the entire set, and not just a handful of songs like they did for the Devotional tour. They recruited Christian Eigner, and he's a fantastic drummer, but I don't know, a lot of Depeche Mode songs just don't work with real drums in my opinion. It makes them sound less unique, even when playing songs like I Feel You, because Alan was not a drummer, so he played the drums in more of a meat and potatoes, full Rudd kind of way, and I like how harsh the tone of his drums were. But Christian is still a good addition to the live band overall. They also got Peter Gordeno to handle the synths that Alan used to play. Alan was so vital they had to get 2 members to replace him, Jesus Christ. But they're only touring musicians. Occasionally they'll be involved with their records as outside songwriters or a session musician, but it's quite rare. And in my opinion, this is a bit of a problem. Not because it's not Alan, I'm not that much of a shill. But they lost that sense of cohesion from album to album like they had with Alan because of how hands-on deck he was with the production, interpreting Martin's songs. But from this point onward, it's kind of luck of the draw depending on whoever they decide to get as producer for the particular record. And it's kind of a shame that they were just down a member from here on out. And their first big tour since Songs of Faith and Devotion was for their second greatest hits package. Singles 86 to 98, which as you can expect picks up from where the last singles album left off. Funnily enough, Alan is still credited as a member despite being out of the band by this point, which is kind of odd. Overall, it's not a bad collection, but quite an essential if not for the new song they recorded for it, Only When I Lose Myself. They have a running theme of writing new songs for best of packages, it seems. And it's no Shake the Disease, but it's still really good. I honestly like it better than most of the songs off Ultra. This song really goes all in on the trip-hop angle, but with those strings and the grimier sounding synths, it sounds like the song has more stakes and drama. It's one hell of a vibe. It's about the inherent codependency in love and relationships. Not necessarily a bad kind of codependency, but people always talk about how their partner completes them or makes them whole, which is why breakups hurt so much. In a weird way, you lose a part of yourself.
Before I could even start to understand, it's only when I lose myself in someone else that I find myself.
But anyway, let's see if the next record can excite me.
Maybe one of the reasons we have stayed around for so long is we never really had ambitions.
I like where you're coming from.
No, but I mean, we never, set out to conquer the world. We never had, great domination plans. So I think that helps. We've always been quite a negative band. We've always looked at it as a real negative outlook. And maybe that helps as well.
We are the dead of night. We're in the zombie room. We're Twilight's parasites. We're self-inflicted wounds.
Okay, I'm just gonna rip off the band-aid here. Exciter's kind of fucking boring. This album really feels like the band spinning its wheels. The rust slightly felt on Ultra is on full display here and it sucks. Martin was having some pretty severe writer's block, and honestly with the quality of his outputs, it's not surprising at all. So many songs sound similar and they don't do enough to set themselves apart. I find it funny that this time the band said they wanted to present the intimate and delicate side of Depeche Mode. Then what band was I listening to for the past 20 years? This band always show the intimate and delicate side of themselves. I mean, See You, My Secret Garden, Somebody, Sometimes, Here Is This House, The Things You Said, Waiting for the Night, Blue Dress, Clean, One Caress, Home, Sister of Night, The Bottom Line, I can keep going. I think what they really meant is they wanted a more monotonous and less diverse sounding record, because damn near every track is low-key the same with not a lot going on production-wise. And what is going on isn't exactly interesting. And there's not much atmosphere either. They got Gareth Jones back as engineer for the first time since Black Celebration, and I can hardly hear him besides Dead of Night's harsh instrumentation, which is a welcome break from the monotony, I'll give you that, but he may as well not even be there. The producer this time around is Mark Bell, who had previously worked on Bjork's Homogenic, and I hear too much 90s Bjork as opposed to Depeche Mode on this thing. And it makes sense because Dave said that Martin had practically no input on the production at all. If I had to pick a track to spotlight, I guess it would be When the Body Speaks. It has some atmosphere, some cool strings, and Dave's tender vocal. I mean, you could actually make the argument that this track actually showcases the more intimate and delicate version of the band, even in comparison with the earlier records. So yeah, Exciter isn't very exciting. I mean, I can only assume they picked that title ironically like they did with Music for the Masses or Violator. But at least with those albums, they were recording some of the finest music of their career, so it didn't come across as annoying or pretentious. I know a lot of people love this record, and I applaud anyone who can listen to this boring dreck and get something out of it. Even the few highlights like Dream On or Shine aren't even that great. They never rise above a 6.5 out of 10 or maybe a 7. So it's hard for me to get anything out of this record. Hopefully they can pull it together for the next one, because if not, then I feel like we're going to be in for a bit of a downer ending of this retrospective.
I really felt like when we started this album, or way before that there was definitely unfinished business. We've made some really, really good albums together, but it's still that feeling of like still want to make the best record that we possibly can, and still striving for that. There's something that you haven't yet completed, or something for some reason.
All this running around, well, it's getting me down. Just give me a pain that I'm used to. I don't need to believe all the dreams you can see. You just need to achieve something that rings true.
Maybe the band did end up playing The Angel, because I'm happy to say that this record is fucking fantastic. In my opinion, the finest in Songs of Faith and Devotion, and there's a lot of reasons why. First off, the production is great. The man behind the desk this time is Ben Hiller, who had previously worked with U2 and Blur, and he wasn't a Depeche fanboy like the previous two producers. No disrespect intended, but a band like Depeche Mode lives and dies by the strength of their producer and how well they work with him. And Ben was a great fit. He could push them if he felt like he needed to, and he had no preconceived notions of what a Depeche Mode album should sound like. So he helped them achieve more contemporary sounds, which you might think might be dated today, but It isn't. I mean, these videos are painfully 2005, but the music itself is still really good. And it was around this time that Dave put his hat into the ring to write some songs. He had developed a taste for it on his debut solo album, Paper Monsters, in 2003. He co-wrote 3 songs on this album, writing the lyrics, and the band's drummer Christian Eigner and Andrew Philpott wrote the music. And this was a great thing for the band. Every album from here on out would have a few songs written by Dave and some outside songwriters, and it's welcome since we haven't had a band member write a song on a Depeche Mode album since Alan Wilder's If You Want from Some Great Reward. It provides a great change of pace, and I'm sure it alleviates some stress for Martin so he doesn't have to write as many songs, even though apparently he was quite against the idea of other people writing songs, but he got there in the end. One of these Dave penned songs, Suffer Well, was a single, and with that fantastic bass riff alone, it became a Depeche Mode classic instantly. It has a rock feel at points, but the glitchy synths gives it an uneasy tension until it leads into a really heavenly chorus. I also love Dave's lyrics. It's brooding with a hook that someone once told him, likely at a low point, and it makes sense. If you're gonna suffer, take care of yourself and suffer well.
Just hang on, suffer well. Sometimes it's hard, so hard to tell.
Another great thing was Martin started DJing after Exciter, and he found himself buying a lot of dance records, so I found himself writing more up-tempo material, which was a godsend, let me tell ya. I love this band's slower numbers as much as the next guy, but if you fill out the entire album with slower cuts, don't be surprised if you find your audience fast asleep. This, coupled with the harsher sound at play here, gives the best case scenario for a Depeche Mode album without Alan. The band said that they would use Ben Heller's ancient synthesizers that he had and record them in weird ways to give him a really aggressive sound that I'm a big fan of. John the Revelator has both these elements, and it's one of the best songs on the record. I like to think of it as a 21st century take on Personal Jesus. A painting that I'm used to has a distorted siren that acts as the main riff, which is super interesting. And another Dave Penn song, Nothing's Impossible, isn't up-tempo, but it's a slow dirge that succeeds where damn near every track from Exciter failed, mainly by having a production that doesn't sound bone dry. The instrumental slowly crawls, and it works with Dave's almost monotonous vocals. It's a total mood piece of a song.
Even the stars are brighter tonight. Nothing's impossible. I still believe in love at first sight. Nothing's impossible.
Lillian is classic Depeche Mode, the most similar to the band's old sound on this record without feeling like a retread. Macro has a great spacey atmosphere with really well done strings. But my favorite track is Precious, a song Martin wrote about his divorce and how it was affecting his children. I mean, the words are written by and large for his children, and they're kinda heartbreaking. Martin let it all out on this track, and it's really admirable because this is one of the most personal songs he's ever written. And again, I really like how Ben Hiller approached a slower tempo Depeche Mode song. There's no harsh instrumentation, but it has such a full sound with great synth tones and spaced out guitars filling the sonic space. It's an absolute joy, and Dave sells it as if he wrote the lyrics himself. Without a doubt, one of the best Depeche Mode songs ever. Probably top 10. See guys, I'm not that much of an Alan Wilder fanboy.
Things get damaged, things get broken. I thought we'd manage, but words left unspoken left us so brittle. There was so little left to
I'm honestly surprised I like this record as much as I do. After Exciter, I thought this band would become boring caricatures of themselves, but they proved that they could still bring it. Though I'll be remiss not to mention a bone I have to pick. I feel like this album kind of loses steam by the end, like they used up most of their good ideas at the beginning. I think it would have done this album wonders if they cut it from being 12 songs to 9 or 10. And cut the fat a little bit. Again, I'm not a big fan of how long the albums have become, but the band are back on track, so let's see how they build upon this momentum.
Sounds of the Universe just sounds right, and like I said, I like the arrogance of it too.
I think that this one just fits in the kind of the history, really. I mean, it seems to fit neatly in with the history of the rest of the stuff that we've done. There's not really a theme to the record, other than like all the themes that I always write about, I suppose. I keep joking about it, that I keep writing the same songs over and over again, but it's sort of true up to a point.
When you get what you need, there's no way of knowing. What you have is another hole to feed.
Sounds of the Universe is very okay. It doesn't make me bored to tears like Exciter, but it doesn't make me, well, excited like I was with Playing the Angel. I can't even really put my finger on it. The production is once again quite good since I kept Ben Hiller, and they're doing some new things because Martin was buying crap ton of old synthesizers and drum machines on eBay to use on this record. There's new sounds here while fitting in with the Depeche Mode mold, which is commendable. What isn't very commendable is the lack of punch these songs have. Few of them lead with a hook like they did on Playing the Angel, so when most of these songs end, while they may be enjoyable, you don't really remember any of them. In fact, I'm glad I gave this record time to live with me because my opinion is definitely more positive than it would have been. I can tell this is an album that kind of has to grow on you, but after letting this record sit with me for a good few months, I can't see it rising above like a 6 out of 10, guys, I'm sorry. The songwriting isn't bad at all, but it feels like an album of well done album tracks. I don't hear any standout tracks or singles. The closest it gets is the track Wrong, but that song honestly gets on my nerves after a while. Fragile Tension comes close too. I like the buzzy synths. They kind of remind me of some great award, Black Celebration type stuff. And it has some nice flourishes of keys and guitars that get searing in the pre-chorus. It feels like a modern take on an older Depeche Mode song that we've never heard before. We got some good atmosphere in this record. If nothing else, it sounds fantastic. Spacewalker's a cool instrumental, Peace is a fun one with a weird hook that is soaked in atmosphere and is a song that Martin has called one of his best, and Martin, I love you, and it's a good track and all, but really? Perfect is a slower paced track that doesn't sacrifice interesting instrumentals for the sake of its slower pace like some of this band's tracks at this time do. Overall, I'm just not huge on Martin's contributions on this record. At this time, he said it was being more prolific, writing a lot of songs, and maybe he should have written less songs and spent more time on them because a lot of them, in my opinion, are lacking a certain je ne sais quoi. Maybe Ben Hiller got too lax as a producer, he didn't push them as much as he did on the previous album. It doesn't help that this record is their longest yet. It's only a little longer than Ultra, which was already an album that was too long in my opinion, but at least Ultra had some real standout tracks. Though there's at least one song of this record I can see myself returning to, and that's one of Dave's songs, Come Back. Given how much more experience Martin has over Dave in writing, that probably shouldn't be possible, but here we are. I really like the somewhat ugly, dirgy, and droning production being paired with such a pained song of Losing Longing, along with Dave's fantastic performance and these lovely pretty synths in the chorus almost drowned out by the drone of the rest of the track. It sounds like a light in the darkness that's been snuffed out.
Weeks turn into months, months turn into years. Reaching the same conclusions, gathering up the fear.
So yeah, that's Sounds of the Universe, and while I at least liked most songs, I didn't really love many of them. On the bright side, if you love Playing the Angel, there's a good shot you'll like this album too. If you're not me. To me, it feels like a great album trapped in a good album. That's why I'm a little harsh on it. It wouldn't have taken much more to make this album at the very least on par with Playing the Angel. They just needed to whip these songs into better shape. In 2011, they released their second remix album. They released one in 2004, but I didn't bother discussing it because these things usually don't interest me that much. I mean, the 2004 one does have a pretty cool remix of A Question of Lust done by Flood that I would recommend, but it's not something you have to go trampling over grandma to get your hands on. And this new one, for the most part, is the same story. But this one not only has Vince Clarke remixing Behind the Wheel, transforming the song into something new entirely, without losing the core anxiety, if you will, of the original. But our man Alan Wilder is also back, taking a crack at the track In Chains from Sounds of the Universe, with a remix that decimates the original. Now, In Chains was a song I didn't even mention because I just didn't care for it too much on that record, but Alan gives it an atmosphere Ben Hiller, with all due respect, can only dream of. It stays quite low-key throughout its length, with some nice, tasty effects added here or there, but always keeping the focus on Dave's voice. And it raises to such a height by the end, with such lovely strings as well, and just the way it swells is so magnificent. And that last minute or so with that haunting guitar lead, which I swear is not in the original version, I feel like I'm listening to a spiritual successor of Walking in My Footsteps. I hope I'm not sounding too biased here, but it's just so majestic. It makes me wonder, if only. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Ultra and Playing the Angel, but I adore what Alan brought to this band, and hearing this almost brings a tear to the eye. And during this time, Alan joined the band, or rather Martin, on stage to play Somebody at the Royal Albert Hall for the Teenage Cancer Trust.
We've got a very special guest tonight, Alan Wilder. First time in 16 years. Someone who'll help me see things in a different light. All the things I detest, I will almost like. I don't want to be.
And Martin even showed up at a Recoil event in London, so many people thought that Alan was coming back. But that obviously didn't happen. And it's probably for the best, all things considered. We should move on. We shouldn't romanticize the past to the point of writing off what the band is currently doing just because one member isn't there. As I've already discussed, there has been a lot of good material since Alan left. And yes, I'll love it as much as the next guy if he came back. I still don't think anyone can translate Martin's songs anywhere near as well as him, but he's an older man now. I don't think he has much interest in going out on the road for hundreds of dates at a time. I mean, that's pretty evident since he hasn't toured a whole lot with Recoil or even made much new music in the past 15 years. It's kind of a shame, but he shouldn't have to if he doesn't want to. I'm sure he's just having a good time enjoying the quiet life with his family in his older age, and there's nothing wrong with that. And hey, we still have the music they made together while it lasted. While on the Sounds of the Universe tour, Dave fell ill, and while in hospital, a cancerous tumor was found in his bladder. Thankfully, it was caught very early on, so it was removed, and after a few months of cancer treatments, he was fine. But for a guy who already got really close to dying in the 90s, he understandably was very scared. I think Dave Gahan has more lives than a cat at this point. Last time something like this happened to Dave, we got a lot of introspective and interesting music. Hopefully something scary like this can inspire the boys a little bit.
For the first time ever, really, when the band and Ben listened to the songs, the demos for the first time,
we were amazed by the quality of the songs, but particularly amazed in the direction.
I think it made the recording of this record a lot easier because we had, a basic template that we knew that we liked.
Strongly sort of drawing on like a blues influence, that Delta blues thing.
There's only one way to soothe my soul. There's only one way to soothe my soul. There's only one way to soothe my soul. Only one way to soothe my soul.
This album is so uninspired, guys. This feels like a lesser Sounds of the Universe. And I didn't even care for that album, really. I don't understand the purpose of bringing back Ben Hiller when the material you're doing with him is sounding more and more dull. Some bands can get away with having a producer not doing a great job, but Depeche Mode is not one of them. Look at Daniel Miller, and to a lesser extent Gareth Jones, Daniel Bascombe, Flood, or even Ben Hiller 8 years ago. When they hit a good band-producer combination, the band practically gains a new member. But it sounds like Ben Hiller just stopped caring and was merely hitting buttons, and speaking of older producers, Flood came back to mix this album, which is cool to see since he swore off ever working with these guys again after Songs of Faith and Devotion. But he's got nothing to work with here. It sounds no different than their previous release. The songs are okay, I guess, but they sound like demos. There's a reason why older fans of this band started calling them demo mode around this time. There's no interesting or memorable riffs, guitar licks, nothing. Half the time it just sounds like I'm getting Discord notifications. There's no drama to be heard. Most of the songs sound the same, but if I had to pick a favorite, I'll go with Broken, I guess. I like how sweet it sounds, and it has a kind of nice hook that's really pleasant to the ears.
When you're falling, I'll catch you. You don't have to fall that far. You can make it. I will be there. You were broken from the start.
But even that track doesn't hold a candle to highlights from Plain the Angel. I'm not comparing it to the classic records, but I think I'm well within my rights to compare it to material from only 2 albums previous. And don't you dare call me stuck in the past. For one, I was born in 1999, so Alan was already gone by the time I was even born. 2, I like lots of modern music. 3, I love Twain the Angel. And 4, the band themselves seem to be stuck in the past. Not only are they clinging to the same producer for albums in a row like a life raft, this album sounds identical to their last record, and the songwriting itself isn't exactly treading new ground, especially the lyrics. Let's see, we have songs like the opener, Welcome to My World, about a personal point of view. Yep, there's no opening tracks by this band that sounds familiar to that one. The song Slow is about sex, and Should Be Higher is about Dave's struggle with addiction. At what point can I say they're treading water? I could excuse it all if the music itself was good, but it's pedestrian fluff that at best leaves me wanting. Martin, Dave, Fletch, if you're actually like doing anything, please give me something to work with here. I didn't mean like this.
The album's called Spirit, and really, and the songs are all reflect on where's humanity. What's happening? Where do we care anymore?
Recently, you've had a fan that you didn't appreciate, the leader of the alt-right, American alt-right, and he claimed that you were his number one, their number one band in a way. What was your immediate reaction to that news?
Oh, I can't say it on TV, can I?
We can track it on the satellites, see it all in plain sight, watch men die in real time, but we have nothing inside.
This album sucks. Probably my least favorite of the records. It shares many of the same problems as Delta Machine in terms of production, which is great. Even though it's a different producer this time, James Ford, who's a new buck compared to these old geezers. He'll work with Arctic Monkeys, Florence and the Machine, and Gorillaz, so there's some more contemporary sounds to be found sometimes, which is cool, but for the most part, I'd be hard-pressed to separate any of these tracks from Delta Machine. Apparently he was able to de-escalate a really bad, almost banned-ending arguments between Martin and Dave, so I'll give him credit for that, I guess. But in 2016, the year this album was recorded, a certain individual was about to be elected president of the USA, and there was a rising emergence of something called the alt-right, and Depeche Mode, a band with 2 members who live in the US, felt compelled to write about it. Quite poorly. No, don't get me wrong, I hate Trump and his drooly fans, the alt-right can suck my dick, and when Richard Spencer for some reason hailed Depeche Mode as the official band of the alt-right, I can totally see why the band would immediately want to draw the line away from such a repugnant cunt. Especially Martin, who's half black.
Look, this is a dangerous guy. He's like, you know, he's highly educated. You know,
Richard Spencer.
Yeah. I don't say his name really, but
he's not here to defend himself.
You know,
I should say that.
They're the most dangerous kind of like idiots, aren't they? People actually listen to them.
But the political writing on this album is vague, meandering, and fails to say anything of substance. Now, they haven't written anything political as far as I can remember since Black Celebration, but compare songs like Where's the Revolution to the direct and scornful People Are People, or going backwards to direct assault on UK's bizarre fascination with the monarchy on New Dress, or fail against the not-so-subtle metaphors of master and servant. My buddy Drew, who you may recognize from the James and Friends videos, said, and I quote, "If somebody told me to start a revolution and didn't tell me what cause, I'd think they're CIA, and I could excuse everything if the music was good. But they can't even write decent hooks on these tracks. Just because a song has a message, it doesn't mean you can't write a catchy melody, guys."
Where's the revolution? Come on, people, you're letting me down.
Dude, weak sauce. They don't even flow phonetically much of the time. Dave is trying best to sing these lyrics in an awkward way to fit the meter of the song. Could you guys not have refined these lyrics? Was this really the best you could do? I can't even really highlight any songs here. I don't like any of them. They're all cut from the same cloth. You can't even dance to any of them. And don't tell me I haven't been giving these albums enough of a chance. I've been putting off this video for months just to give these albums a good amount of time to live with me, you know? If you've been wondering why this video's been taking so long, blame these records. And if anything, I just like this album even more because I've had time to listen to it so much. If anything, I've listened to them too much. Sure, it may not be as bad as American Life or that Le Tigre song they did about Trump, but those are low bars. And this album is at least halfway competence, I guess. But the fact that I found myself even comparing a Depeche Mode record to those wastes of music is a bad sign. Poor effort, guys. Do better. But unfortunately, there wouldn't be a next time to do better at for Andrew Fletcher. While in pre-production for their next record, he passed away of an aortic dissection suddenly in May of 2022. He was 60 years old. Rest in peace, buddy. Fittingly, the album the band was working on had the title already, Memento Mori, a Latin phrase that translates to English as, remember, you must die.
We were there from the beginning together, you know, fighting over bus fare.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, from the rehearsals in the church home.
He was the band's biggest fan, and believe it or not, I honestly believe that he enjoyed being in Depeche Mode more than me or Dave.
Absolutely.
When I moved to Santa Barbara, you know, I'd been living there for like, I don't know, 3 months or so, and I'd met an English friend who ran a bar, and it took me like, I don't know, ages. Eventually he said to me, "Oh, what do you do, by the way?" And I told him. And so the rest of the band came to town, and Andy went into the bar for a drink, and he said my friend said it was so weird. He said it took me so long to find out what you did. He said, Andy told me after like about a minute.
I'll meet you by the river, or maybe on the other side. You find it hard to swallow when you watch another angel die.
The release of Memento Mori was a bit of a weird time. Depeche Mode were now a duo, literally half the band they used to be in their classic years, and the death of Fletch cast a shadow over whatever their next move would be. And they're experiencing a late career resurgence thanks to The Last of Us. They had a lot of eyes on them, and speaking for myself, I didn't really know what to think. I just started the scripting process for this video when they started teasing this new album, and after the last few records, I can't say I had high hopes. Especially when I found out that they were using Spirit producer James Ford once again. But to my surprise, when I listened to the debut single, Ghost Again, I really liked it. It's a dark but triumphant note to show that they can still bring it, but in a way that still comments on the state of the band now that they're down a member. There's neat riffs, interesting instrumentation, and Dave's vocals are somehow barely showing any signs of wear despite him being in his 60s. And the lyrics, thank God, harken back to classic Depeche Mode of writing about feelings and emotions in an honest way. Slightly abstract, but it paints pictures with words. And then I found out Martin didn't even write the lyrics. This is one of 7 tracks on this album to be co-written by Richard Butler from the Psychedelic Furs. He wrote the lyrics and Martin wrote the music. And maybe Martin should do more collaborations with members of other classic 80s pop bands, because you can't argue with the results.
Faith is sleeping, lovers in the end, whisper will be ghosts again.
The motif of this album, death and facing immortality, came after the COVID-19 pandemic started and we saw people start to drop off like flies. And also the state of the band itself. They weren't young men anymore, and when good artists realize that, you get a lot of their most interesting and most reflective work. They almost dropped the theme after Andy died. Hell, they almost broke up after Andy died. This band has had so many near breakups, it's a little insane. But they decided to stay the course because they figure that's what Fletch would have wanted, and I think I agree. And it just makes this album more poignant. But some things feel like less of a reflection and more just member berries. I mean, just look at some of these song titles. Don't Say You Love Me, remind you of anything? Never Let Me Go, Never Let Me Down, People Are Good, People Are People. And even though this album sounds much better than previous albums, the synths are layered and more fun to listen to. They do some cool things with reverb, and James Ford thankfully put his foot down and doesn't let Martin play boring blues licks in every other song, but we're not too far removed from demo mode territory. Parts of these songs just sound a little bare sometimes, though the final track, Speak to Me, features the best soundscapes and atmosphere I've heard from this band since the 90s. It sounds like it could be in Twin Peaks. It has that kind of vibe. Its crescendo is magnificent and draws you in so well with lyrics that invoke what I can only call cosmic dependency. Dave and Christian Eigner wrote the lyrics, but after James Ford and mixer, engineer, programmer Marta Soloni, I apologize for the terrible pronunciation, spent a day reworking the song, and Dave loved it so much that he gave them co-writing credits, and it's 100% deserved if you ask me. The song wouldn't be the same without them.
I'd be grateful, I'd follow you
Memento Mori, all in all, is an okay way to end off this retrospective. I'd be lying if I said it was a new classic that could stand toe-to-toe with their best, but it's still a good album, and without a doubt their best since Playing the Angel. I'd hesitate to call it great, but that might change in time. And for now, that's all she wrote. I love this band with all my heart, and you might be looking at me funny after I reacted so negatively to albums like Spirit and Delta Machine, but I reacted that way because I love this band so much, and I only want to see them at their best. I may have high standards, but they're to blame for that. They shouldn't have set the standard so high to begin with. They're true artists, no matter what the lineup. They've never been afraid to try something new and out of the box. Their influence is so wide-reaching, and they have a little something for everybody. They're one of the most varied and musically diverse bands to ever penetrate the popular music zeitgeist, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And here's to Dave, Martin, Andy, Alan, and Vince, you fucking legends. And until next time, take it easy, party people.
He was going to ask which member of the band usually gets all the girls. Is that what you want to know?
Yes.
I thought so. So come on, fellas, be honest.
Well, Fletch, I think it's Fletch actually.
It's Fletcher.
Boys.
I mean, he's pretty sexy.
He does get a few boys as well.
Subscribe to
Escoped Mids.